What's up everybody, my name is Kinetic and welcome back to Diablo 3 Reaper of Souls. This is my Crusader Road to Torment video. This may actually be a mini-series or something like that in the future. We'll see how it goes. But for this first video, what I just wanted to talk about is the Crusader, what I think about skills, abilities, builds, and things like that to help out people that are maybe interested in playing as a Crusader. Maybe you have already started a Crusader and you would like a little bit of advice on what skills are good and things like that, or for people that just want to hear my opinion, another Crusader's player's opinion about skills and things like that. So let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is point out some of the more obvious things. I am level 70 and I am level 50 Paragon. However, for the purpose of this video, for the starters, I'm not using any of my Paragon points, and I'm also not equipping any of my more powerful gear. I've just put on some basic blues and yellows with some simple gems and things like that to try and emulate what maybe the average player might have or something like that at this point without uber gear or whatever. Alright, so looking at the skills now, even though I'm level 70, what you're looking at right here is what I would say is a good build for kind of mid-range, like sort of like 30-ish, maybe 40 or something like that as you're leveling through your Crusader. These are all of the skills that I'm using, the passives, and what I'm going to do is quickly try to go over each one of these and explain why I chose these and maybe an alternative if one of these doesn't really suit you or something like that. So let's start with the primary. The primary, of course, is what you will use to help you regain your resource. The Crusader uses Wrath, and we have Punish, Slash, Smite, and Justice. Justice is the only one that is actually a ranged attack. And the reason why I like to use a ranged attack for my primary, there are a lot of situations where I am trying to finish off maybe a simple mob or maybe even an elite or something like that, but I don't want to have to use an ability with a large cooldown or a high resource cost or something like that, and they're on maybe the other side of the map where I'm trying to kite them or something like that. I just want to pick them off really simple and cheap, right? That's why I like using a ranged primary attack. For these others here, Punish, Slash, and Smite, these are almost entirely close range attacks, and they have their benefits and they're cool and stuff like that, but for me, Justice is the best. I really like when there's somebody on the other side of the map and all I gotta do to finish him off is just throw my hammer and he's dead. And I don't have to spend hardly anything or at all, actually, because it's a primary. For the rune, what I like to use is Crack. We have a lot of cool runes here, but Cracked is the best because when the hammer hits an enemy, there's a chance that it will crack into smaller hammers that fly out and hit additional enemies. So I may throw that hammer out there and it will basically split out and hit more enemies than one, which is great for crowds maybe of zombies or something like that. Really, really good stuff. I did use for a long time Sword of Justice, mostly just because aesthetically it's a really cool looking ability. Essentially what you get is, instead of a hammer, you get a sword, and this was so cool to look at because it reminded me of Tyrael from Diablo 2 as he's throwing the sword at the World Stone. I swear that's where they got the inspiration for this, because it looks exactly like that. The actual benefit to this, other than it looking totally badass, is that when the sword hits an enemy, you gain increased movement speed for a short time. However, I've tested this quite a bit, and to be really honest with you, that increased movement speed is so hard to even notice. It's really not that beneficial. It really isn't. The other one that may be, aside from Crack, maybe kind of okay is Justice Holy Bolt, which heals you for every enemy that you hit with it, but it's also very minor as well. I would suggest sticking with Crack. This is really effective when you're throwing this and hitting groups. Next up, this is actually not just a secondary, I would say this is really my primary attack in terms of when I want to use up my Wrath. When I really want to dump Wrath, kill a lot of enemies by dealing a lot of damage in a short amount of time, this is what I turn to, Sweep Attack. It's really efficient, really hard hitting, just a very good skill overall, especially out of the secondary category. It only costs 20 wrath, and this is why I think it's actually probably the best, because out of all of the other Crusaders that I have kind of talked to that are having a little bit of trouble with Crusaders, they are having a problem with dealing enough damage. The Crusader has not a lot of wrath overall, so you want to be able to get the most out of the wrath that you have, and sweep attack does exactly that. For only 20 wrath, you're throwing your weapon around in front of you at groups of enemies, dealing a lot of damage, and you can do this very, very quickly in rapid hits and deal out a lot of damage. We've got some other cool skills here, like for example Blessed Shield. This is actually really cool, kind of like Justice. You know, you're throwing a weapon out there and it hits enemies. This one actually ricochets in between enemies, which is quite cool, and it also only costs 20 wrath. But in terms of like damage, I think the sweep attack trumps the Blessed Shield. When you get a bunch of guys in front of you, and you, like I said, you start swinging that sweep attack, it deals a lot of damage, and it's really, really effective. Fist of Heavens, I've also got here. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but like I said, for when I really want to deal damage and get the most from my wrath, sweep attack is definitely where it's at. The rune that I'm using is Holy Shock. Gain life for each enemy hit by the Mystic Flail, so this will help keep you nice and healthy as you are probably being hit by those enemies that are just in front of you. You'll actually be getting health back every time you swing that flail, so that's really, really good. Next up we have Utility. Now I kind of have to talk a little bit in multiple parts here in order to actually talk about the utility skills here, because I can't talk about this category without talking about Provoke. And the reason why I need to talk about Provoke is because it is one of two abilities that the Crusader has that helps you regenerate your wrath. As you can see, Provoke has a 20-second cooldown and generates 30 wrath. What you do is you taunt all nearby enemies and instantly generate an additional 5 wrath for every enemy taunted. And I thought that this was the shit right here. I was so thrilled to have this and to use it for a very long time to help me regain wrath. It was very, very good. Later on though, I realized that, like I said, this is one of two skills that the Crusader has that will help you generate wrath. The other one is called Shield Glare, and this is the one I've actually got set to my number 2. It's on a 12-second cooldown, which is nearly half of the cooldown of Provoke. Light erupts from your shield, blinding all enemies in front of you. Now, you might say, okay, so where does the wrath generation come in this? It comes from Zealous Glare. Gain wrath for each enemy blinded. So essentially what we have here are two abilities, one of which is almost half the cooldown, but also generates wrath. And instead of taunting enemies to come and attack you, it blinds them. And I've tested these back and forth, Provoke and Shield Glare with Zealous Glare, and they both grant you a lot of wrath back. Depending on how you use it and how many enemies are around you, both can actually be very, very good. But with the additional benefit of blinding your enemies, I really think that Shield Glare is very, very good. Not to mention the fact that it's only 12 seconds, so you can actually regenerate more wrath faster because simply of the cooldown with the blinding effect. It's just a great package altogether. Alright, so now we're going to go back to... Here we are, the utility, and I've got Phalanx here set to my number 1. It has a 15-second cooldown. And what it does is by default, it summons powerful avatars who charge forward to the targeted destination and fight for you. So for a short time, you summon these warriors, kind of like the barbarian who has the ancients, right, that come and fight for him. It's kind of like that, but it's for a shorter time, and they're not really all that powerful. For the rune that I choose, I go with Bowmen. The Bowman rune summons avatars that don't march forward, but instead they stand in place or run with you and chase after enemies, and then once they're within range, they will start shooting with their bows. So what you got here is, instead of guys that are running around trying to melee like you basically have a small sniper squad, which is really good because instead of, like I said, you running around, these guys can just pick them off with their bows very quick, no matter how fast or where they are. We also have some other cool utilities here. Condemn, which deals like a massive amount of damage around the Crusader, which is kind of cool, but I don't really find it as useful as the Sniper Squad Bowman. Steed Charge is actually really useful, not so much for leveling and grinding and trying to kill enemies or whatever, but just getting around. You've probably seen this already by now. You get on a horse and you ride really fast, and it's a great movement ability. Alright, so we kind of already talked about the Shield Glare, which is under defensive. In terms of the Crusaders' offense and defense overall, the thing that I struggled with, and I see a lot of other people have struggled with, is they can take damage no problem. They're tanks. They really are very tanky warriors, but they don't have the ability so much right out the box to deal damage. So when it comes to defensive, I don't even bother with Iron Skin, because I don't need it. I'm already really tough skin. What I really need is more damage, so I don't use that. Consecration is kind of interesting. You will heal while you're standing on the consecrated ground, but as much as I've played these types of games, I know that I'm likely not going to be standing in any one spot for a very long time. There is kind of a cool rune with this. For the shattered ground, enemies standing on the consecrated ground take damage. So instead of a healing, you get basically sort of like a ground nuke, which is kind of cool, but overall, I wouldn't say it's all that spectacular. Judgment can actually work really well together in combination with Sweep Attack, because Judgment will, for all enemies within an area, immobilize them for a short duration. And if you combine this with Mass Verdict, all enemies judged are first drawn into the center of that area, and then they are immobilized. So if you got a bunch of zombies or whatever, like, you can just collect them all like really quickly with this, and then get in their faces with Sweep Attack, which is kind of cool. Nice synergy between those two skills, but I wouldn't honestly recommend this really so much. Alright, next up we've got Heaven's Fury. This is easily one of the best skills that the Crusader has. In fact, the whole Conviction line is laced with really good skills. We've got Falling Sword, which is kind of like the Dragoon ability from Final Fantasy. He jumps up into the air and then he comes crashing down onto his enemies. Falling Sword is a lot of fun and really good. And if you are using Phalanx and then you choose Rise Brothers here with Falling Sword, you're going to have an army of guys with you, because Rise Brothers summons avatars from the Order to fight along your side. So with this Phalanx, this is actually a really cool thing to experience, and I recommend playing around with that just a little bit. But what I would use instead of Rise Brothers, though, if Falling Sword really is something that you want to use a lot for killing enemies and grinding and things like that, use Rapid Descent, because when you manage to land on a lot of enemies at one time with Falling Sword, it reduces the cooldown. And I've seen the cooldown for Falling Sword reduced on average 40 to 50%. If you aim it right properly and you have quite a lot of enemies in that spot where you're landing with Falling Sword, you can get a really nice cooldown reduction using Rapid Descent. Akarat's Champion and Bombardment. These two here are not something that I think are very good for just your average enemies. I would say that Akarat's Champion and Bombardment is great for boss fights, but it's not really good for just running through towns and for killing maybe packs of elites or something like that. And mostly it's because of the cooldown. As you can see, Akarat's Champion is on a 90-second cooldown, which is massive. And there's never a time when I'm just killing normal enemies that I even against elite packs, I wouldn't even save this because it's kind of a waste to have one skill sitting on my action bar just for elites. Same with bombardment, it's on a 60-second cooldown, which both of these are just far too long. Instead, I go with Heaven's Fury, which is only a 20-second cooldown. And it has a lot of really good skill runes as well. We've got Blessed Ground, which is the one that I actually recommend that you go with. If you're using Heaven's Fury, go with Blessed Ground, because it's kind of like Consecration with the rune that damages enemies that are standing on that ground. As Heaven's Fury is hitting an enemy, and as it maybe finishes off an enemy and travels to another, all of that ground, wherever that beam goes to, is going to leave that that kind of damaging consecrated effect there where it once was, which is really good for, again, groups of enemies. This is all about, actually, this whole thing, this whole build, I should say, is all about killing groups of enemies for the most part. We also have some other runes here. Split Fury is kind of cool. Instead of one beam, you get 3 smaller beams that will split out and target multiple enemies, which is kind of cool as well. You could go with either this or Blessed Ground and probably have very similar effects. And we've got some others here which are interesting as well, but yeah, that's that. Alright, and then finally, secondary over here, we've got Fist of the Heavens. Now the reason why Fist of the Heavens I think is spectacular is because of Fissure. The rune Fissure here creates a fissure of lightning energy, dealing damage to nearby enemies. So again, this is sort of like another one of the little mini AoE kind of damage abilities. If there is another fissure nearby, powerful lightning will arc between them, and that's what makes this exceptionally good. Because if you cast this in 2 different spots, in between those 2 spots, there will be very powerful lightning and arcs of lightning that bounce in between those 2 spots. So if you cast this, for example, like on opposite sides of a pack of mobs or whatever, that lightning is going to pulse from those 2 spots and in between, dealing a lot of damage. I find that it's really effective.
There is a certain beauty in the stillness. Let's kill it.
I totally agree with you. We need to go out and kill some stuff. Is there anything, though, first that I want to talk about? Probably the laws. Now, the laws are kind of cool. The only one that I think is maybe good for helping you deal out more damage is the Laws of Valor, which increases your attack speed. These other 2 here are more defensive, the Laws of Justice and the Laws of Hope. But again, I feel like the Crusader already has a pretty good time with taking damage. It's not a matter, unless you're trying to be the tank or whatever for your group or something like that, or you just like laughing at enemies that are beating on you as hard as they can and not really dealing damage to you. Maybe that's your thing, but for me, I'm trying to get damage out to my enemies. I think that's pretty much it for the active skills. I'm going to quickly now talk about the passive skills. Again, a reminder, this is all about sort of like your mid-level range. This isn't end game, this isn't for 70 or anything like that. This is just as you are going to 70, the road to Torment, so to speak, right? So the passives that I've got selected here are available fairly early on. We've got Fervor. When an enemy dies within 15 yards, you gain 10% attack speed for 3 seconds. This is pretty good. Combine this with Sweep Attack, and your attack speed is going to definitely shoot up there pretty quickly. We've also got this passive here. This is actually a really interesting passive, but I will talk about that after I'm done talking about the passives. I know that I'm just totally teasing you right now, but right here, this is probably one of the most important passives that you definitely want to get slotted as soon as you have it available. Righteousness. Your primary skills generate an additional 3 wrath, and this also increases your maximum wrath by 30, which is great. We've also got Insurmountable, when surrounded by 4 or more enemies within 12 yards, your block amount is increased by 30%. This is, out of all of the ones from Fervor to Wrathful, this is, I guess, the defensive passive that I chose for my Crusader. And Wrathful, as I just mentioned, each point of Wrath spent heals you for 825 life. Heal amount is increased by 1% of your health globe healing bonus. So combine this with Sweep Attack and Holy Shock, and you're definitely getting life back for the damage that you are dealing out, which I think is one of the simplest and neatest ways to keep yourself alive defensively, but also allow your Crusader to have an attack kind of benefit to that defensive benefit. Okay, so why did I want to wait until later to talk about Heavenly Strength? Well, Heavenly Strength is a really interesting passive overall. You can wield a two-handed weapon in your main hand while bearing a shield in your offhand. Sounds awesome, right? Oh, but read the fine print just below there. Your maximum movement speed is reduced by 15%. Ouch. This kind of sucks a lot, I think, because you're not even 70 and you are trying to move forward through the game, fight more enemies faster, not slower. And that's the big downfall of Heavenly Strength, is your maximum movement speed is reduced by 15%, which just sucks, I think. I mean, it's really cool, the idea of having a two-hand sword in one hand and a shield in the other, but I don't like moving slow ever. I'm trying to move faster, not slower. So for me, I think that this is something that, for me personally, I just don't like. But if you really feel like you want to have a two-hand sword in one hand and a shield in the other, then by all means knock yourself out with this. I will say also that there are some really cool shields out there. I've actually got one of them right now that actually negate the movement decrease. Here on my Hellskull Legendary Shield, Heavenly Strength no longer reduces my movement speed. So I get the benefit to have a two-handed weapon in my hand and a shield in the other, but it doesn't kill my movement speed, which is really, really nice. So now I can move nice and quickly and hit really hard with this freaking weapon. Oh yeah, and it also bursts in a giant blast of green, which is of course awesome. Okay, so I'm actually gonna swap that back though. Let's go back to, where were we? Insurmountable, right? And I'm gonna show you guys what this build is like now with all of these skills and the passives that I've chosen.